Talk me through, how did sort of Howbout come about? Because you were a lawyer, and now you're doing really cool business.
Yeah, so I studied law at university and then went on to become a corporate lawyer after years of exams and training. So what I was finding fascinating, though, was that life in the office, time was multiplayer. Outside of the office, calendars were single-player productivity tools or incredibly simple and over basic.
Because we're going to come on to how you've got it right with the messaging, but where do you feel your messaging was maybe wrong in that early stage?
Messaging at first, we were, I think, focusing far too much on the solution without trying to make it really clear what the problem was. One of my new recent favorite quotes is, "It does not matter if you can articulate who your hero is. Everyone needs to know who the villain is. The hero makes no sense without the villain."
What is one thing that founders listening could do today to sort of do this a bit better?
You have to go. It goes way beyond your vision and mission. You have to figure out what your ethos is, especially in consumer. What is your right to win? What is the reason someone uses, buys, gets, downloads my product? What is the emotional reason that they do that?
Hi, I'm James Johnson, founder and CEO coach, and this is the Peer Effect podcast, where your peers will tell you how they're unlocking their 10 million plus business. My guest today, Neil Tanna, is the founder of Howbout app. It's a social media calendar with 6 million users and 150 million events. They're backed at Series A by both VCs and influencers like the Sidemen, who are Europe's biggest influencer group with over 300 million followers. This is the episode for you if your message isn't landing and you want to turn that no into a yes. Let's get into it. So, Neil, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Well, today we're going to talk about the power of getting your story right. But interestingly, in the research, I found out that you've got a very troublesome right hand.
Yeah, I am ridiculously injury prone, such that I cannot get private medical insurance for my right hand. They refuse to. Everything from the sort of wrist down is very much uninsured. It's because I've injured this hand so many times. Basketball, washing up injuries. It always seems to be that when I'm going to A&E, it's for this right hand. And so when you have to fill out the medical questionnaires and they saw just how much I had injured, I have to prove that I can go 2 years without injuring it, and then they'll be willing to add that. But yeah, that is definitely a unique fact about me.
So you're lucky you're a tech founder, not a pianist.
No, that's exactly. I don't think I'd ever survive as a pianist or even as a basketball star, though. Long did I want to be as a kid growing up. But that probably, and the fact that I didn't grow taller than 5'7", probably is going to make the basketball dream or stay only as a dream, to be honest.
Well, I spent a bit of time in China and the Philippines, and they always assumed that I'd be really good at basketball because I was 6'2", and I'm really bad. It's like probably the sport I'm worst at.
I mean, growing up, I actually was one of those kids who actually hit his peak height actually quite early. So when I was playing basketball when I was like 13, 14, I was like, okay, no, actually, I could play. I was good on average height. Yeah. And then average very much just became very much short. And then, okay, this guy is very short to play basketball, especially when the average height of professional basketball was 6'8". So yeah, that dream left me. But 6'2", I'd happily take. So I'm jealous.
Well, maybe we combine your talent and my height. We'd get a half decent basketball player. So, talk me through, how did sort of Howbout come about? Because you were a lawyer, and now you're doing really cool business.
Yeah. So I studied law at university and then went on to become a corporate lawyer after years of exams and training. I was working in tech as an M&A lawyer, but that's kind of where the cool part of that story ends. It was very much just a lot of late nights, a lot of paperwork. But don't get me wrong, the clients were cool, but I remember always wanting to be the guy in the t-shirt and not the guy in the... And this was pre-COVID, so this was suit and tie. And I had the idea after sort of leaving uni and becoming an adult for the first time and realizing that, Jesus Christ, all my friendships were fizzling out, not because I stopped liking them, but just purely because when you stop seeing each other, you have sort of less connecting you, and you have less connecting you wouldn't really classify yourself as someone who really is a good friend of each other, right? If you don't hang out. And so what I was finding fascinating, though, was that life in the office, time was multiplayer, in contrast to life outside of the office, which I was finding was very single player, monotonous, archaic, slow, boring. When it was really easy for me to organize a meeting with my boss, or for me to schedule things across multiple calendars, multiple time zones with colleagues or people we were working with. But outside of the office, calendars were single player productivity tools, or incredibly simple and over basic. And keeping up with your friends was either social media, but even 5 years ago, social media was becoming more and more entertainment. It wasn't really connecting with me, with my friends anymore. And it's especially the case today. These things are not built for friends. They're built for fans, followers, feeds, and filters now. Or group chat. But the difficulty with group chat is you might talk to your best mate or your other half every other day, or every day, but you're sort of wider group of friends. You're not messaging that frequently because you've got no reason to. And so we then all know the dance, right? You reach out to that friend, we haven't caught up in a few months, we should meet up. And then after you've done the back and forth for ages, aligning that you can't do this Saturday, they can't do the one after, etc., you agree to do the dance again in a few months, and your friendships just fizzle out. So I wanted a way to make time multiplayer, to make it fun, so that I could instantly get over the faff of keeping up with the admin side of just managing relationships and friendships, so that we could actually make that experience an enjoyable and social one, like we have in the office. And I sat on the idea for a few years because I was so focused on sort of graduating my way up the legal ladder. And sadly,
getting that nicer and nicer suit.
The nicer and nicer suit, exactly. You're not spending your money on much else because you're very much in the office. So at least I was. My hours weren't kind. And sadly, what changed is my mum passed away, and that was the wake-up call I needed to be like, what the hell am I doing with my life? I almost needed that shock to my system to reevaluate how I was looking at the world and how I was spending my time. And my mum sadly passed away in March 2019, and in April the business was incorporated.
Wow.
So I very much was just like, I'm not wasting any more time. That summer I left my job. I convinced two of my best mates from uni to also leave their jobs and build this with me. So Jake was an investment banker, is now our COO. Duncan was a spacecraft engineer, is now our CTO. And then the three of us just were doing what every sort of first-time founder needs to do. We were reading every book under the sun on how to sort of upskill ourselves as fast as possible. And here it was, how do we build a consumer business where growth is so important, but we have no money to spend on growth, and we wanted to build it off network effects, right? The app is better when your friends run it. So how do we build those growth loops into the product? But also we surrounded ourselves with people far smarter than we were, because again, it's a cheat code if you can learn from people's mistakes without having to make your own along the way. But we were very naive. We thought people would be sort of VCs, angels would be giving us investment funds just based off the fact that we were just had a great idea. And of course, that did not happen. And so the next 6 months were very much just building the MVP, sleeping on Duncan's floor, working on his sofa, and just trying to prove that we first-time founders who did not come from the world of consumer social could build in this world. Because
we're going to come on to like how you've got it right with the messaging, but where do you feel your messaging was maybe wrong in that early stage?
The conundrum that we would definitely have is this a social network, like a social media, or is it a utility? And the difficulty with trying to build in social media is, how do you monetize that business? Because if you look at all the historical apps and social media, like your big household names today, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, none of them monetized in the early days. And they just built off a phenomenal growth loop where this app or this product, this platform is fantastic, so I want to use it a lot and I want to tell my friends about it. And so when you're trying to build in that world, how you need to prove enough traction to prove that you are onto something. Or you have to have come from that world where you're able to justify that, look, I spent 10 years working at X, I know exactly, I've seen this niche in the market, trust me on this. We weren't able to show either of those two things. So messaging at first, we were, I think, focusing far too much on the solution without trying to make it really clear what the problem was. Like one of my new recent favorite quotes is, it does not matter if you can articulate who your hero is. Everyone needs to know who the villain is. The hero makes no sense without the villain. If you think about that in any
really nice
film or TV show you watch, the hero by himself would be dull. You need to have the villain really clearly articulated. And I think in the early days, when I look back, hindsight 2020, we were very good at articulating the hero and dreadful at articulating the villain.
So more so Alan Rickman, Sheriff of Nottingham, less Kevin Costner.
I think that's very nicely put.
Okay, so you're in this early stage, sort of you're trying to get seed. Like you did eventually get seed. Is that when you feel the villain started appearing in your messaging a bit more?
It's really interesting. So our first round, so no VC took us seriously. Where we had no sort of caliber, credentials. We had no traction. So we, to be honest, stopped fundraising. We just put our focus in on building and getting our sort of initial users. And so we launched it in December 2019 and we grew to 5,000 users in that month. And it was because, going back to my point about network effects, we were really, really good at aiming for the core user, which was the CFO, the Chief Friendship Officer.
Nice.
Every single group of friends has a CFO. The type A person, the planner, the micro-influencer of the friendship group, it's usually a she. Now, if we could unlock her, she would bring her friends on. One of those friends would be a CFO in another group and the network should continue. That was a thesis, and thankfully it played out to be true, because if you've got no audience, there's no point in trying to gather an audience or target an audience based on everyone. If you focus on everyone, you focus on no one. So we were meticulous in just focusing on a archetype that we positioned as the CFO. After we had shown enough traction over the first 3 months, we then closed a pre-seed round, which was just an angel-led round. It was 200,000, but unfortunately we lost 100,000 of it because of COVID, as in half the money was meant to land in February, half the money was meant to land in March. And obviously COVID hit at the start of March 2020. And so the second 100K just disappeared. Wow. And so for the next year, we just survived off 100K. But that COVID year was actually a blessing in disguise for us, because it just allowed us to entirely focus on product. There was no expectations of growth. We were building in the landscape of trying to make it easier to get friends together. And the
COVID was not your friend.
The government made that very illegal very quickly. And so just being able to focus in on product, so that when Eat Out to Help Out came, if you remember those days, August 2020, that was our time to shine.
That's fascinating. How did you specifically target the CFO? Because it's a very clear archetype. I totally get the logic.
So how we targeted them in 2020 is very different to how we target them today, because you're constantly having to evolve based on platforms, all this. But how we did it back then is fascinating. It's sort of our first growth hacks. 5 years ago, it was all about Instagram memes, right? Before Instagram or before social, the world went video. Memes were king, and so everyone would post native memes on Instagram, but usually they would post screenshots of tweets and they would post it on Instagram, and meme pages were starting to become the first proper influencer style of page. And what we found fascinating is, right, if we can get in on this landscape and we could articulate one that was speaking to this problem, the comments should be filled with the CFO or their friends who would be tagging them as the CFO. So we thankfully jumped onto the trend, and a few memes went viral. And one of them was wouldn't it be awesome if there was an app that existed that could that you could sync all your schedules and it would instantly show you when you and your friends were free. Got 40,000 comments of people tagging the CFO or the CFO tagging their friend. And then what Jake, one of my co-founders, and I would do is we would reply to each and every comment as us, Neil and Jake, not as the business, because as is the world we live in today, you are far more likely to trust a stranger who's giving you a recommendation than a brand you've never heard of. Even though it's a stranger, you're far more likely to trust their recommendation. So we'll be like, oh, there is an app that does this. It's called Howbout. You should go check it out. Whereas if we were the brand and doing it, they would be like, who's this sort of spamming me? Or I don't trust it. It'd be funny because if they ever unnested all of those comments, they'd see that we literally would reply to every single one saying the same thing. But yeah, that is how because basically we didn't know how to target them, so we basically just built the mechanism for them to come to us, and then we replied as us.
That's a really clever growth hack.
Yeah,
it's amazing how many stories starters do have one clever growth hack in their starting.
Unfortunately, memes are very old school now. It's all about video. Well, we have our own mechanisms now. We do it, but very much through video today.
Okay, so you've sort of done the pre-seed. Half of your pre-seed then disappears. You focus on product.
Yeah. And then we close our seed, which was 2 million, and that was VC led, but very much focused on European VCs. So we're very much the archetype of a consumer social business is very much a US business. If you think of all not even just the tier 1 businesses who've built in this space, but even the tier 2, the tier 3 businesses everywhere from sort of Facebook, but even all the ways to like Pinterest, anyone who's built in sort of the consumer network sphere, they've all been US businesses. And the difficulty of us trying to build in the UK was trying to convince European VCs on our business model, which is growth is the number one. We're not trying to make money from them yet, because this is a winner-take-all market, right? This is not like a dating app where you can have 5 dating apps on your phone. You can have Bumble, Tinder, Thursday, etc., 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 and you can cycle between them. You only need one calendar. Like even though we're building for a whole new audience here, which is Gen Z, they don't need multiple calendars. Like we don't need multiple work calendars. And so if we were growing, and we were growing, we didn't want to have any breaks on that, of which trying to make money from that audience could be, before we had proven out enough scale, in case a competitor came out of the woodwork and all of a sudden we're competing against an entirely free product that was better, that perhaps was better funded. And explaining that to the European venture scene, when they didn't have someone to position us as an example of that, they perhaps not even in their portfolio but in an adjacent VC's portfolio, was difficult. And so, you know, we always found it funny that when we would talk to a US VC, they'd be like, why on earth are we talking about monetization? And when we talk to a European VC, they'd be like, why are we talking about anything apart from monetization? And so our pitch would very much, and our story, going back to your question, would very much have to change depending on the venture capital we talk about. But now at Seed, we spent 10 times as much talking about monetization than we did at our Series A.
So then if sort of the US market was ready for your...
It wasn't, sadly. So at Seed, the US was a tiny market of ours. The UK was our largest market. And so even though you can say that there's a lot of similarities between the UK and the US, there was no proof points that the US Gen Z audience would take to the product in the same way. And so between Seed and Series A, that's when the US became our largest market, because we focused on it as such. Whereas going back to something I was saying earlier about how if you focus on everyone, you focus on no one. When we were leading up to our Seed, we were only focused on the UK. Whereas between Seed and Series A, we knew that we would have to change that and prove to ourselves as well as to the world that this would work in the United States. And so that's why at Seed, it wasn't for lack of trying. US VCs just did not look at us as a business that had known growth loops in the United States, because we just hadn't proved them out yet.
So that shift to the US growth between Seed and A, was one of the main drives of that, this realization that you wanted US funding to get it, you needed US?
Yeah, candidly, yeah, a big part of that. I mean, we knew that we would get more excitement and larger, not just the amount of raise, but also valuation from the US, because they are more familiar with this business model, right? Not just consumer social, but consumer full stop. Like, I think the UK is doing better now at shifting attention back to consumer, but it's always had a sort of like a warm, cold reaction to consumer. And like, I think when we were trying 3 years ago to really get enough traction and sort of momentum with UK VCs, we were finding it harder than when I've gone out to the United States and been talking to funds there. We've definitely felt more excitement and more momentum for what we were building and like the space we were building in. But I would only say that was partly it. The other partly is, for us, we know that we're building in the sort of consumer utility, consumer social space, and it's all about building mass market, mass audience. So the sooner we can move into what will become and did become our largest market and proving that to ourselves, the better. We didn't want to allow ourselves to grow too big before we've proven out or not whether we shift to the US, because otherwise we were already at that point starting to outgrow the UK, and like we didn't want to hit any sort of ceilings with our specific, which at that time was quite small. It was just sort of 18 to 22-year-olds in the UK. And there were debates happening about whether we try and focus on the US or whether we should be focusing on Europe, because we were starting to see a lot of organic momentum in places like Germany, Hungary, Denmark, Norway. So there were things that were working. But obviously, when you start thinking about continental Europe, you have to start thinking about language localization, which pre-AI was a lot harder than it is today. So all these debates were happening, but we fundamentally, for a variety of reasons, including the fact that the venture capital investors were in our space, were more likely to be based there, we focused on the US, and thankfully it paid off.
So we're going to come back in a sec to this idea of like who you went after.
Yeah.
But in terms of, let's say, your villain.
Yeah.
So like, I really like this concept of like, who's your villain? Did your villain change from seed to Series A on that journey, or did they just become more fleshed out?
I think it's a great question. I think it's both of those two things. You definitely have a better understanding of who your villain is as you have a better understanding of your audience, but naturally you have a better understanding of who or what the villain is based on how your users use your product, right? Like we're talking about this a lot right now. It doesn't matter about what you say to your user about what the product is for. It matters about what they ultimately use it for, right? And that can open your eyes a lot about like, are we building in the right way? Like it all comes down to what your product's ethos is, right? Like it should be very easy to understand from a user who has not read all your marketing materials about what your product is for, what they should be using it for, why they should be sharing it with their friends, and why ultimately they should be paying a subscription for it. Like the benefit should be so clear to them, and it should ideally be an emotional benefit to them, right? Linking back to my villain story, it should either make life easier for them, more fun for them, more enjoyable for them. It's solving some sort of pain point for them, right? And if you can unlock that hook, you can lead to an ultimate payment, a subscription payment where you're not resenting that company that you're having to pay. Like, for example, I'm a very happy subscriber of Spotify because they have solved a pain point for me. Now, part of that pain point for me was stuff that was nothing to do with them, which is I want to be able to listen to music on tap, depending on whatever music I'm in the mind to listen. And part of the villain was created by them, which was ads. I don't want to listen to ads. But I don't, it's funny that I don't think of them as the villain. I just think of music with ads in between them as a massive annoyance. So it's interesting. The villain doesn't have to be something that is just in the world. It ideally is, and most of it should be, but it can also be annoyances that you have naturally created in the product as well by not being behind it. So it's constantly, I think, an evolution. But for example, where we were at seed compared to where we are now, moving into our Series B territory, is how do we have a solid understanding of how we scale based on how users are actually using the product, not what we just say they should be using it for, right? So at the beginning, we said the villain was scheduling or the pain point of going back and forth on group chat. But it was fascinating that users weren't then just using us as a social planning tool. They weren't just using us as a way to organize drinks or a birthday party. They were actually putting their entire calendar and their entire lives into their Howbout, which was fascinating for us because back at our seed, we weren't positioning it as a social calendar. We were positioning it as a social planner. So it had a very distinct purpose, which was planning. But as users started adding everything to their calendars, it actually turned out that, okay, we haven't created a planning app. We've actually created a Gen Z, a Gen Z platform to share time. And they weren't just adding in things that we add into our work calendars of just meetings and tasks. They were adding in everything because they loved that their friends could see it, because we had built a native calendar that was pretty, their friends were on it, and everything was shared. So they were adding not just the things that they didn't want to forget. They didn't want to just add their holidays and their appointments and their school schedules. They were adding in when they're on their period, when they're on their dates, everything that made them who they were. And it was fascinating for us because it kind of linked to what was already happening with sharing their live location, right? So Gen Z, it's a well-known habit of them that they love sharing their live location with their 5 to 15 closest friends. Why? It has some utility, because if I see that you're nearby, let's hang out. Most of it is nosiness. Like, you're a really good friend of mine. Where do you go with your day? Now, millennials and boomers think, Jesus Christ, think about your privacy. Like, why would you want someone to know where you are 24/7? And they're like, it's cringe that you think that this is weird, because they've grown up as digital natives, like they've grown up sharing everything. So why wouldn't they want their 5 to 15 closest friends to know where they are? Time is exactly the same. Millennials and boomers be like, I couldn't think of anything worse than sharing my calendar with people, with my friends. I don't want people to see what I've got on. But Gen Z absolutely love it, because nothing is more authentic and pure than knowing, in a world that is trying to push us more and more and more away from friendship and more to just creators you don't know than people you do. What is more pure than you being able to just see that tonight I'm watching Netflix, tomorrow I've got dinner with my mum or my dad, and on the weekend I've got a date coming up? Because time has 3 lives, right? what is coming up, what I'm doing right now, and what I've done. And the great thing about all those is those are triggers for conversation that don't otherwise get triggered to happen on group chat. And so, like, if I see that you've got a date coming up, James, I can be like, oh, good luck, man. You've not been on a date for a while. When you're at the date, I can be like, mate, I hope the date goes well. And when the date's finished, we're like, how was the date? Now, all of those are triggers that can happen because all we've done is just socialize time and how you're spending it. And that villain then became very different. The villain wasn't just scheduling. The villain was losing touch with your friends. And it's a fascinating evolution of how you can picture your villain in a way that you can then articulate that back to the user, which is really important because a user isn't necessarily thinking about the pain point in the same way as the one they're feeling right now, which is, God, I'm really struggling to organize this drink, versus, or if I don't organize this drink, will I have a drink with you again? Now, it's a fascinating one.
I suppose also, as you say, the whole social media landscape's changed in terms of what social media is used for. It's become very much from a personal thing to a broadcast thing. It's interesting how people are using your platform for things you don't intend, but also how the whole landscape changes how people use it at the same time.
I mean, it's fascinating. We all saw this with Facebook, right? When Facebook started, old school Facebook was amazing. Like, it connected you with your friends. You could keep up with what they were doing, when they changed jobs, when they got a new girlfriend or boyfriend, when they went on holiday. You write on their wall, see where their birthday. It literally digitalized friendships, but like keeping up with them, it was pure. And it all changed when the news feed came. Like, okay, now I've got a whole feed of what my friends are doing. And then as they went more and more and more into that, and Facebook became more and more convoluted, more and more chaotic, we then all moved to, like, we were like, okay, fine, I've got Instagram. It's peaceful. It's just for my friends. It's still a feed, but at least it's just of my friends. And then again, as more and more time has passed, we've again gone to a world where it's like, God, I can't remember the last time I saw anything to do with my friends on there at all. It's literally just, and like, before you know, I'm like, God, how have I spent an hour scrolling reels? And so it's fascinating how it's all changed, for sure.
So when's the feed coming to Howbout?
The focus on Howbout will always be your friends, but the trade-off with that, the difficulty is when you're comparing us to then big tech social media and how they're getting Gen Z to spend 6 hours plus on their apps a day, because the dopamine hit is so intense, it becomes really difficult to position your app as something that can sit alongside that either needs to compete with the 6 hours a day or needs to be a really separate, but purposefully separate tool that can exist alongside that, but can still justify why here building in the sort of subscription space instead of the advertising space. What's your right to win? It's a constant discussion, for sure.
So if we go back to the fundraising, I think one thing that's quite interesting about what you guys have done is like you've this sort of move from pre-seed to sort of friend and family, then sort of seed to European VCs, Series A, more American VC. But you have also at the same time attracted some quite sort of celebrity influence investors as well. Yeah. Now you've got sort of the Sidemen as investors. How have you gone about that? Because that feels like quite a Gen Z thing to do as well, to step away. So you've gone both traditional and
how
did that come about?
We've actually got we've got a whole variety. We've got venture capital investors, angel investors, crowd investors, and celebrity investors. We've also got a large sports team have invested in Howbout as well. The Chicago Cubs, they anchor a venture capital fund called Marquee Ventures, who invested in us last year as well. So we've definitely got a great breadth of investors, but I think specifically focusing on the Sidemen, the importance of trying to build a brand when you've got a specific target audience in mind, whereas here we do like Gen Z, but specifically now sort of more on the younger side of it, it's how do you come across as authentic, relatable, and there's no better way than trying to really position yourselves in a place where you know that they're going to feel authenticity, which is here. How do I build alongside creators who these guys massively look up to? Like, don't get me wrong, I think it would be very cool to have David Beckham as an investor, but I don't think Gen Z would be as excited with David Beckham as an investor as probably me or my parents' generation would be, putting it into just a purposely exaggerated context of like how we all look up to sort of our heroes in different ways. Like by partnering with the Sidemen, getting investment from them, not only are we looking credible for a specific type of audience who very much look up to the Sidemen, but distribution channels are so much easier than to get for a specific type of audience, right? So if we do a campaign with the Sidemen, we know that the audience who are watching that clip or who are reading that sort of PR newswire are very much going to be the target audience we would have otherwise been directly wanting. So it's been a fantastic way to go after not just sort of a much easier distribution channel if you've got someone who's very credible in your space, but it's definitely cool to be, because this is all new for everyone, right? The fact that celebrities are investing in startups through these sort of venture models now, so it was cool to be part of it so early.
Because it feels, I mean, we often talk about smart money historically in terms of a VC who brings money and something else.
Yeah,
for you guys, it feels like that is very much smart money.
Absolutely, yeah, but just more on the distribution side than anything else. But absolutely, I mean, the great thing about them as well is not only from the distribution sort of, as you think about it in the literal sense with an audience of users, but also here distribution just to other creators, other brands, other investors. It's been fantastic.
And also, they probably just get it. Like, imagine they can give you ideas on things that work for them.
Absolutely.
I mean, how did you? I suppose people going after VCs is a well-trodden path. Like, how as a founder listening, going after an influencer investor, how might they do that?
I think it's a very similar way to how going after an angel or going after a venture capitalist, especially, is you have to explain to them what the like. What is your short, medium term, and long term plan look like? When we were explaining to the Sidemen, I think what is fascinating for them as a group of people who are trying to invest their money is what value are they going to be able to add to the business, and what is the success criteria looking like for this business, right? The fantastic thing for them is they know that if they add their voice to something, it's going to grow faster. So it's only smart thinking to think, okay, well, it would be great if I own part of that brand that I'm going to be shouting out. So I think it's making it very clear that this business was already doing well. Like, it's not only going to do well with you. I think that was key. Like, when we were talking with them, they're diligencing all of your traction in the same way a normal VC would, because no one wants to put money into something that is fundamentally not a sound business. So I think it's making very clear that there is something that's already worthwhile to invest in as a normal investor would look at their business, but then making it clear to them what their distribution, what their voice, what their audience can add to it, and why it's actually worthwhile them getting involved. But otherwise, it's sort of how to get in front of them. It's just the usual ways. That is always a crappy answer to give, which is you either got to find a great intro in, so that you know sort of you're going to be put in front of them by someone who has got their ear, which is always one of the easier ways in, or send the best email ever to their VC, arm, who do very much accept inbound and cold emails to them, but just make sure it stands out from the crowd. But well, I would say easier said than done, but I would hope that with AI today, it's at least easier to do some of the background research. But if everyone's already set that threshold high, then the bar continues to raise higher, but you have to stand out from the crowd.
And do you think from a success, I mean, when you're going through fundraising, there's obviously a lot of no's. Do you think, well, two questions, was sort of the influencer strategy quite a key part of your raise? So is that a deliberate strategy or sort of an accidental strategy?
No, it was actually accidental. So it was one of our angel investors who had met the guys, was like, hey, you should definitely talk about raising from some of these guys, because it could massively help with distribution. We actually hadn't considered it at all, but we had some space in our round. Thankfully, our Series A was oversubscribed, but when you were sort of looking at the landscape of who you could kind of be letting in, and to your point, you're always looking smart money first, and our Series A lead was exactly that, a phenomenal investor, been there, done that, can open doors, going to provide a lot of value on your board. But then when you're looking at how that's sort of going to fill out, like, it's intriguing, isn't it, when you've got a phenomenal creator who's got a massive audience to this thing, like, what's the impact of this could be? And thankfully we made the right call. It's been awesome having them, but it definitely wasn't like a targeted approach. I mean, we were their first investment, so it's not like they had been.
Wow.
It's not like they had been sort of a long track record, and we've been like, oh, we've got to go after this. So it's been awesome though, and I'm glad to see them doing well.
Because it feels like, I mean, you see sort of Ryan Reynolds doing sort of
it's definitely getting more common now, isn't it?
It does feel like a. But I mean, I work with quite a few founders, and I think you're the first one that has sort of an influencer on their cap table.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether that's just kind of going to become more of a standard part of a raise.
It's a fascinating question. What's becoming really interesting to see in the market about how many creators or traditional influencers are becoming founders, right? And why wouldn't you? If you've built up through a lot of graft and time and hard work, you've built a following of 1 million people, 5 million people, whatever. Why wouldn't you build a business? Because you've got your distribution channel there. So it's fascinating to see just how many creators, influencers are becoming business owners. But then when you think of like the sort of the top of the top, the people with hundreds of millions of followers, and seeing them then investing in a variety of startups, I just think it's the way the world is going, because distribution is very different now that the world is becoming more and more and more digitalized. We're all on our phones, so I just think it's going to become far more common now. But then it will just be, how do you get distribution in a way that still feels authentic? Because we are all very used to influencers selling to us. Now, how do you then position that in a way where the creator is letting you know about a product that they want you to download, buy, get, use in a way that isn't directly tied to them? It's not their product, but it's a product they've invested in. How much should they be open about that? Does it help if they're open about it? Does it add authenticity? So there's a lot of questions around how you maintain the authenticity, but it's fascinating that this is happening. And like, if you can crack it, you got great distribution there.
Well, I always like to sort of finish up asking the question, like, what is one thing around, I mean, we talk quite about fundraising today, but it was fundamentally that is sort of the story game, the story, right? The villain, the hero. Yeah. What is one thing that founders listening could do today to sort of do this a bit better?
I think you have to go. It goes way beyond your vision and mission. You have to figure out what your ethos is, especially in consumer. What is your right to win? Like, what is, and you should be able to, and everyone in your business should be able to articulate it in a couple of sentences. Like, what is the reason someone uses, buys, gets, downloads my product? Like, what is the emotional reason that they do that? What is the reason they share it, and what is the reason they buy it? And like, that ideally is a hook, is a loop that continues to hopefully mean that they're either going to spread your brand more, or they're going to use your brand more. And that ethos needs to be so well defined and understood, because most of us, when you get to the scale up phase, there are multiple ways that you can build your business, and a lot of the ways feel like right ways, but you can't do all of them, right? If you build in this direction or you build in this direction, both seem plausible, but you can't do both of them. And the difficulty is trying to do both of them, because if you try and do both of them, you can't articulate to your customer about how you are both these products until you've earned the right to be both your products, or you've figured out an ethos that ties both of these together. But if you try and build in two different directions, it can make understanding what your product is, and therefore what that loop is, really difficult to understand in a way that actually just slows your own growth down. So I think it's really trying to figure out exactly what your ethos is. Like, what is the reason someone should download my product? What sets it apart? And going back to what we said at the start, like, really, what is the villain that you are trying to be the hero about? So to bring it to life, people listening, what would yours be? So if you were to sort of share your ethos. So it's funny it's funny because straight after this podcast, I'm going into a 2-hour meeting where we're identifying exactly what our villain is. So, and the reason I'm saying that is because you should constantly be evaluating it. So we did this exercise 6 months ago. And we ended up positioning ourselves as a shared calendar for friends. Why? Because we wanted to make sure that we did incredibly well on GEO rankings. So we already saw that SEO was starting to feel more and more old school, and we really wanted to do well on sort of agentic search. And so we wanted to position ourselves against something that was incredibly literal, a shared calendar for friends, and it's worked very, very well. But what we were lacking from there was the emotional hook for why you need one, and how do we grow faster beyond people who were just looking for a shared calendar. So I will put a pin in that and come straight back to it once we have articulated really coherently. Do we go down the more social side or do we go down the more utility side? And we'll watch this space.
So we have an update on what Alan Rickman looks like in a week's time.
Absolutely. So hopefully quicker than that, but otherwise, absolutely.
Oh, well, Neil, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing so openly.
No, thanks for having me. It's been awesome. Thanks a lot, James.
Such a good episode with Neil today. I really love the concept of nailing your villain, and that is much more important than your hero. As ever, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next week for another founder episode, or on Monday for a post-back episode with Freddie. If any questions, just reach out at hello@peer-effect.com. We'll see you next week, and happy scaling.